On September 18, 1990, in Almansa, a small town in Albacete, Spain, police forced their way into a house at number 4, where they discovered what would later be described as one of the most disturbing crime scenes in Spanish history. Inside was the body of an 11-year-old girl, dead and brutally disemboweled. Those responsible were her own mother, a faith healer, known in Spain as a curandera, along with 2 of their neighbors. When investigators asked why, the answer was almost impossible to comprehend. According to the judge handling the case, José Rafael Cuesta, the mother told police that her daughter was pregnant with the demon. The next morning, newspapers across the country carried the same chilling headline: Las Exorcistas de Almansa, the Exorcists of Almansa. In 1990, it had been 15 years since Franco died in 1975, and the transition to democracy was relatively peaceful, actually. The Catholic Church, surprisingly, stepped back from political power, which helped quite a bit. But Spanish society? It was going through this massive transformation. See, under Franco, the Catholic Church had been the official religion. It had enormous power over education, marriage, everyday life.
Un Estado totalitario armonizará en España el funcionamiento de todas las capacidades y energías del país.
But after his death, Spain went through what historians call a religious transition. The church and the state started occupying separate spheres, properly separate for the first time in ages. By the 1980s, divorce was legal. Contraception became available, and the rigid Catholic morality of the Franco years was crumbling. These changes in Spanish life were as radical as the political transformation itself. People called it La Movida, the movement. But in small towns across Spain, old traditions didn't just disappear. Faith healing, for instance, had deep roots in Spanish history. From the 1870s right through to the 1930s, Spain had this documented tradition of curanderos, folk healers who'd use a mix of herbal remedies, prayers, and what the medical professionals back then called magical elements. Now, in Almansa specifically, in 1990, this practice was absolutely thriving. There's this journalist, Emili Gisbert, who wrote about it just days after the crime happened. He said, "The people of Almansa acknowledge that curanderismo and spiritism have become accepted practices among the residents of this town. A genuine legion of people devote themselves, altruistically in Almansa, to laying on hands. Babies with fevers, children in pain, adolescents with tendinitis, and adults with minor ailments go to these people's homes and wait for some curative effect after physical contact." Almansa was a town of about 20,000 people, small enough that everyone more or less knew everyone else's business. And among them, one of the most well-known curanderas was a 36-year-old woman named Rosa Gonzálvez Fito. People called her Hermana de la Luz, Sister of Light. She presented herself as a healer, someone who claimed she could cure illness through the laying on of hands, through herbal remedies, and through what she described as a connection to the spiritual world. And her practice was doing so well that her husband, Jesus Fernández Piña, eventually quit his job as a shoemaker to work for her instead. They set up a small waiting room on the ground floor of their house, where he handled the appointments and managed the steady queue of people coming to see her. Rosa had an 11-year-old daughter. Her name was also Rosa Fernández Gonzálvez, but everyone called her Rosita. Now, Rosa, the curandera, had a particularly close relationship with one of her clients, a woman named María de los Ángeles Rodríguez Espinida. The two were lovers, something that was mostly kept out of sight, though people in Almansa were well aware of it. María de los Ángeles also had a sister, María Mercedes, and Rosa began to see an opportunity. She believed that the most powerful curanderos worked in pairs of siblings, so she tried to bring both sisters into her circle, alongside her own sister, Anna. In her mind, it would be two pairs of sisters working together. And that brings us to Saturday, September 15th, 1990. Grossa, her sister Anna, and the two Rodriguez sisters, Maria de los Angeles and Maria Mercedes, they go out for dinner together. Just a normal evening out in Almanza. After dinner, Grossa says she's not feeling well. So the four of them head back to Rosa's house. And this is where things start to go very, very wrong. According to the court documents and testimony from the trial, once they're back at the house, they start taking psychotropic plants. Rosa knew about herbs. She'd been using them in her healing practice for years. But these weren't healing herbs. These were hallucinogens, basically. The four women start having what the media at the time called an orgía satánica, a satanic orgy. According to trial testimony, Rosa and Maria de los Angeles had sex, while Ana and Mercedes watched. They consumed more plants. They started having visions, religious visions. At some point, Rosa started saying she was communicating with San Jerónimo, Saint Jerome. Maria de los Angeles said she was the Virgin Mary. Rosa said she was, well, sources differ. Some say she claimed to be Jesus Christ. Others say she said she was an extraterrestrial from another planet. Rosa's sister, Anna, eventually got scared and left the house, going home. But the other three, Rosa, Maria de los Angeles, and Maria Mercedes, stayed behind, pushing on through Saturday night, into Sunday, and then into Monday. They weren't sleeping. They were barely eating. Instead, they kept taking more plants and sinking deeper into visions. The house began to fall apart around them. They were urinating, vomiting, and defecating in the rooms, smashing furniture and walking across broken glass. On Monday morning, September 17th, Mercedes took the children to school. Rosa's 11-year-old daughter, Rosita, and Maria de los Angeles' 2 children. Then she comes back to the house, and the delusion is complete now. They're convinced they're seeing demons. Later that evening, they started performing exorcisms on Maria de los Angeles' children, sticking their fingers down the kids' throats, trying to make them vomit up in order to get the devil out of them. Maria de los Angeles' husband, Martín, he comes by. He manages to take his kids away, but he can't get his wife to leave. Not long after, Rosa turned her attention to her own daughter, Rosita, who was just 11 years old. In her drug-induced and delusional state, Rosa became convinced that the child was pregnant by the devil. Rosa tells the other two to hold her daughter down with her legs open, and what followed was described in the court records as an attempt to remove what Rosa believed was inside her daughter. Those same documents state that Rosita's intestines were pulled out by hand while she was still alive. According to testimony, Rosita was begging her mother to stop, but Rosa kept going. She believed she was saving her daughter's soul, and after all that, the 3 women began to dance. They danced around Rosita's body, chanting, "Glory to the Holy Spirit! Glory to Jesus! Get out, you bastard!" In the early hours of September 18th, Rosa's husband, Jesus, and her sister Anna walked into the bedroom and was confronted with something almost impossible to process. Clothes were thrown all over the room. The floor was covered in pieces of flesh and internal organs. Rosita's body was lying on the bed, surrounded by religious images, a statue of a saint, and blood smeared across the walls and bed. The women were naked, covered in blood, excrement, urine, and vomit. Jesus ran from the house to get help, and from a neighbor's home, he called the police. Anna stayed behind in the bedroom, frozen, staring at the scene, barely able to move. But it didn't last. The three women suddenly turned on her, screaming that her eyes were the key, that they needed her eyes so the girl could be brought back to life. They actually ended up attacking her, going straight for her face. Rosa and the others clawed at her eyes, causing serious damage to her retinas. Somehow, Anna managed to break free and escape the house, and was later brought to the hospital. Now, when the police arrived, the bedroom was still locked from the inside, so they forced their way into the room. What they found was so shocking that one of the officers had to step outside to be sick. Mercedes was the only one still there. Reports say she was completely out of it, fighting, screaming, and trying to claw at the officers' faces until they finally got her under control. Rosa and Maria de Los Angeles, though, had already bolted. Rosa ran to a nearby bar and tried to hide there, while Maria de Los Angeles stopped a passing car and demanded help, forcing the driver to take her with him. But neither of them got far. Both were picked up not long after. The three of them were still in a visibly altered state when the police took them into custody. The headlines the next day were everywhere. Girl dies in Almansa after satanic ritual. The story quickly spread beyond Spain, with newspapers comparing it to The Exorcist, and people were genuinely terrified. Soon after the crime, the neighbors even painted a red upside-down cross on the house's facade. The trial came in January 1992, and the psychiatric reports were really clear. Rosa González Fito was diagnosed with schizophreniform disorder, Maria Ángeles Rodriguez with psychoreactive alteration, and Maria Mercedes with transitory mental disorder. And then came the verdict. The provincial court absolved all three women. Complete exemption from criminal responsibility due to mental illness. Rosa and Maria Ángeles were sent to a psychiatric hospital, while Mercedes was released, with the judges saying she hadn't taken part directly in the killing. Rosa González was released from the psychiatric facility after a relatively short time. But she couldn't go back to Almansa. People in the town said publicly they'd lynch her if she showed her face there again. So she went to live somewhere else in Spain. The house at number 4 is still there. Well, not the original one. That was torn down. But the place is still talked about in Almansa. And to this day, a lot of people treat that spot like it's somehow cursed. Now, when this story first broke and people saw those images of Rosa being led away in handcuffs, along with all the headlines about exorcism and satanic rituals, Spain was in shock. But here's what most people in the region didn't know at the time, was that this wasn't even the first exorcism case to end in death that year. 7 months earlier, in Granada, something disturbingly similar had already happened. So this all starts on January the 30th, 1990, in Granada, up in the Albaicin, a beautiful city with narrow cobbled streets and whitewashed houses, yet had this reputation for being a bit mystical, a bit superstitious. The kind of place where people talked about spirits and energies. The Guardia family lived there, and they had a problem. A few months earlier, a young cousin, José Guardia Alonso, had died of leukemia. After his death, his uncle Bernardo started experiencing things. He couldn't sleep. He felt a presence in his home. Spirits, he said, invisible beings that would hit the furniture and get into his bed with him. So the family did what you do in a place like the Albaicin in 1990. They called in curanderos, fortune tellers, people who dealt with this sort of thing. Now, one member of the family was particularly invested in all of this. Her name was Encarnación Guardia Moreno. She was 36 years old, separated from her husband, with 2 children of her own. And Encarnación had just come back from France. She'd spent 8 years there, working in a hotel. And according to multiple sources, the hotel owner was involved in spiritism, black masses, and rituals. Encarnación had participated in these rituals, orgies apparently. And at some point during one of these sessions, she became convinced she'd gotten pregnant. But not just pregnant by the devil. So she comes back to Granada and she finds her family's already deep into spiritism, trying to contact her dead cousin. And Encarnacion, she joins right in. The seances become more frequent, more intense. 10 days before what happened, Encarnacion attended one of these sessions and came back home absolutely terrified. She'd been told by the group's leader, a man called Mariano Vallejo Fuentes, known as El Pastelero, the baker, that she was possessed, that the demon was inside her. She told her family she didn't want to go back to these sessions, as she was scared, but they convinced her she had to, that it was the only way to save her soul. Mariano Vallejo was 47 years old. His mother had been a well-known curandera in Granada. He'd inherited her practice, her reputation. He called himself El Elegido, the chosen one. He held seances, performed healings, communicated with spirits. So on the evening of January the 30th, they all gathered in one place, at House 39, right there in the Albaicín. Encarnacion was there with her father José, her uncle Bernardo, her brother José Manuel, her sister Carmen, and some others. And of course, Mariano Vallejo, leading the ritual. What happened next? It's documented in the court records. Witness testimony, forensic evidence. They make Encarnacion drink a potion, 250 grams of salt dissolved in water. That's a lethal dose. Salt in those quantities causes hypernatremia. Basically, it poisons your brain. You hallucinate, you convulse, and you die. But they don't just make her drink it. They beat her, with sticks and fists. They're trying to drive the demon out of her body. They believe that every blow is supposed to weaken it. And all the while, Mariano was in charge, telling them what to do, what it meant, when to keep going. But yeah, they didn't stop there. At some point, Mariano Vallejo takes a needle, heats it until it's red hot, and he inserts it into Encarnacion's vagina, then her anus. People who were there later said that at some point, Encarnacion's voice started to change, that it became deeper and rougher, almost like someone else was speaking through her, and she was saying things that didn't sound like her at all, telling them she was the wife of Lucifer, that the demon inside her was real, and that they had to do whatever it took to get it out. They said she was the one demanding they do these things to her. The ritual went on for hours, right through the night and into the early hours of the morning of January 31st. By the time it finally stopped, she was unconscious, barely breathing, and her sister Carmen, who'd been there watching all of it, suddenly realized how bad it had become. So she ran out to get help and managed to get Encarnacion taken to hospital. But it was too late. There wasn't much anyone could do. Encarnacion Guardia Moreno died on the 1st of February 1990, just 2 days after that night in Albaicín. Cerebral edema caused by acute sodium poisoning. She was 36 years old. Interestingly, February 1st is the feast day of Saint Cecilio, the patron saint of Granada. The same saint whose cave is in the Sacromonte, right next to the Albaicín. The autopsy revealed the full extent of what had been done to her. Multiple contusions, internal burns, and massive sodium overdose. But there was one detail that the forensic pathologist couldn't explain. One detail that all the participants agreed on. At the moment of her death, Encarnacion's hair, which was about 50 centimeters long, stood completely erect. Straight up. All of it. The pathologist had no explanation for this. The participants said it was proof the demon had left her body. The trial came in 1992. The prosecutor asked for 5-year sentences for the main participants, Mariano Vallejo and his partner, Enriqueta Martinez. Not for murder, for lesions resulting in death and criminal negligence. The court agreed. and most of those sentences were served in psychiatric facilities rather than normal prisons. And eventually, they were all released. Encarnacion left behind 2 children, Eva, who was 18 at the time, and José Miguel, who was 14. The house at 39 is still there. No one talks about it much. But people in the Albayzín remember. Now, this case made the news, obviously. But it didn't have the same impact as Almansa would 7 months later, because Granada is a big city, and the Albayzín has always had a reputation for strange beliefs and alternative practices. So it was shocking, yes, but somehow less shocking than what would happen in a quiet town in Albacete. But we're not stopping there. 5 months after Almansa, there was a third case. It's February 16th, 1991. Carnival Day in Huelva, Spain. About 5 p.m. Ana María Jerez Cano, 9 years old, is at home with her family. She won't stop begging her mother, Adoración Cano, to let her go out. Her friend Raquel lives in the building next door. She wants to go visit her. Adoración has always been afraid of letting Ana María go out alone, but Ana María keeps pleading, hands together, promising she'll be quick, until eventually her mum gives in. It's the last time Adoración Cano will see her daughter alive. Raquel, the girl Ana María is going to see, happens to be the niece of a local man called José Franco de la Cruz. Everyone knows him as El Boca, which in English means the mouth. El Boca is 47 years old, an alcoholic with a criminal record mostly for robbery, someone who's never really held down a job and still lives with his parents in the same area. That afternoon, El Boca is doing what he usually does, drinking. He's in a bar, and through the window, he sees Ana María walking by. He recognizes her straight away because she's been to the house before to see his niece, so he leaves the bar and goes after her. According to the investigation, he approaches her. Maybe he says that Raquel is somewhere else and offers to take her to find her friend. We don't know exactly what he said, but Ana María goes with him and never makes it to Raquel's house. That night, when Ana María doesn't come home, Adoración knows. She just knows something's wrong. She goes to the police station, shows them a photo, and tells them she suspects El Boca. She knows who he is. She knows what he's capable of. Because a year earlier, El Boca had tried to grab her older daughter. He tried to drag her away, and fortunately a neighbor came at him and threatened him with a carjack, and El Boca fled. Adoración had been too afraid to report it at the time, but she knew El Boca was dangerous. And there's more. El Boca had even been harassing Adoración herself, hissing at her on the street, calling her pretty in that creepy way. However, the police don't move the way she expects them to, telling her they don't have the resources or the evidence. So instead, they drive her around the neighborhood with a megaphone and start looking for Ana María, alongside her husband and brother. The search lasts 69 days. The whole city mobilizes. Everyone in Huelva knows about Ana María Jerez Cano. Then, on April 26, 1991, 69 days after her disappearance, they finally find her body. Adoración is at home with her other children when police arrive with the news. Ana María's body has been found in the marshland near the Rio Tinto, just a short distance from a spot El Boca himself had taken police to weeks earlier during one of the searches. Standing there, knowing full well what was lying nearby. When officers tell him they found Ana María's body, he blurts out, without even being asked anything, "What no one can say is that she was raped." But she had been. Maybe he didn't believe what he did was rape. Or he actually did, but maybe he thought they wouldn't be able to prove it. The autopsy shows she'd been killed by repeated blows to the head and that she'd been sexually assaulted. And the next very day, El Boca is arrested. An angry crowd gathers outside the courthouse, shouting for him to be lynched as police force their way through. The evidence against him is solid. There's a witness, a neighbor who saw El Boca walking with Ana Maria on the street the day she disappeared. A woman who recognized him. And there's forensic evidence. A rare synthetic fiber found on Ana Maria's body, specifically on her right thumbnail. It matched fabric from a dark tracksuit jacket that El Boca always wore. It was like his signature piece of clothing. On January 12, 1993, the trial begins. El Boca proclaims his innocence. He says he didn't do it. But the jury doesn't buy it. A journalist even asks him, "Do you believe you'll be found innocent?" El Boca's response is telling. But the verdict comes down anyway. Guilty. 44 years in prison. 28 for murder, 16 for sexual assault. Case closed. Now, I know this is different from the other two cases. This isn't a curandera, an exorcism. There's no family ritual, no belief in demons or possession. This is just a predator. A sick man who saw an opportunity and took it. However, things started getting a bit twisted. Some people in Huelva started talking about satanic ritual because of the timing. It was only 5 months after Almanza and 12 months after Granada cases, so people genuinely wondered if it was all connected. Or maybe it was just paranoia. Maybe it was Spain, still reeling from 2 horrific exorcisms in the past year, seeing patterns where there weren't any. Or maybe there was something more. And these rumors became even stronger because years later, something unexpected happened. A man named Jose Barrera was dying, and on his deathbed, he made a confession. His confessor, a man called Emilio Martin, wrote it all down, word for word. Jose Barrera claimed he was a witch, a sorcerer, and he said he'd killed Ana Maria Jerez Cano, that it had been a satanic ritual sacrifice, that Satan protected him. According to the confession, Barrera picked Ana Maria up on February 16, 1991, at 4:30 p.m. near a churro kiosk by her house. He took her in his vehicle out of Huelva. He kept her hidden for over a week. He wouldn't say where. He said she didn't suffer during that time. But then, he said, she was sacrificed to make him more powerful, basically. But there was something off in his confession. He kept using the plural. We did this. We kept her here, suggesting there were others involved. But when his confessor asked who else was there, Barrera said, "I only confess my own guilt. The others will pay as they see fit." This confession made its way to El Boca's lawyer. In 1999, the lawyer filed for a review of the case with the Supreme Court. "I have new evidence," he said. The real killer had confessed. The Supreme Court ordered a review, but ultimately, nothing came of it. Jose Barrera was dead. There was no way to verify his claims. And the physical evidence against El Boca, the fiber, the witness testimony, his behavior, his record, it was all still there. The case remained closed. El Boca stayed in prison. And on April 3, 2012, after serving 21 years of his 44-year sentence, Jose Franco de la Cruz, El Boca, walks out of Morón de la Frontera prison in Seville. It's 10:30 in the morning. A taxi is waiting for him. Journalists are there, and they ask him if he has any remorse, if he wants to apologize to Ana Maria's family. He says, "I don't regret anything because I didn't do anything. I'm innocent." He refuses to apologize. He says he hasn't not done any therapy in prison because "I'm not a rapist." At that point, he doesn't know where he's going to live. He has a restraining order. He can't go near Huelva. Adoración Cano is devastated. She'd fought for years to keep him in prison. She'd tried to get the Perot doctrine applied, which would have kept him locked up for at least 30 years. But the Supreme Court rejected her appeal. She tells journalists she feels discriminated against and deceived by the justice system. She says she knew this would happen, that he'd be released and hurt someone else.
Para mí, simbólicamente es matarla de nuevo.
And guess what? On July 11th, 2012, in Moncloa, district of Madrid, just a few months after his release, a 39-year-old woman is approaching a shelter. It's late at night. A man approaches her. He's holding a knife, a hunting knife. He forces her into a nearby area, and he rapes her. The woman goes to the police. She's traumatized, but she's able to give a description, and she recognizes her attacker. It's José Franco de la Cruz, him again, El Boca. El Boca is arrested again, charged with rape. When Adoración Cano hears the news, she's not surprised. She's indignant, yes. Devastated, yes. But not surprised. She tells the media, "I knew this would happen. I warned everyone. And now another woman has been victimized. At least, thank God, it wasn't another child who lost her life." So what actually happened to Ana María Jerez Cano? Was her murder a satanic ritual, as José Barrera claimed on his deathbed? Or was it exactly what it appeared to be? A pedophile who killed a child, and a dying man who made a false confession for reasons we'll never understand. There's no way to know for certain. The physical evidence points to El Boca. The witness testimony points to El Boca. His behavior, his comment about rape, his history of attempted abduction, his harassment, all of it points to him. But José Barrera's confession, with its specific details, its apparent sincerity, its use of the plural we, raises questions. Questions that will never be answered. What we do know is this. In the space of 13 months, from January 1990 to February 1991, 3 deaths in Spain were linked, rightly or wrongly, to demonic possession, exorcism, and satanic ritual. 2 of them definitely were. Encarnación in Granada, Rosita in Almansa. The third, maybe. Maybe not. I'll leave it here for today. And if you found this one interesting, you can help the channel out by giving it a like and subscribing if you haven't already. It really does make a difference. I'll see you in the next one. Take care, and as always, thanks for watching.